Okay, let's begin. This morning we're going to be looking at some active reading strategies and intentionally making sure that while we read, we're remaining switched on in our thinking process. In particular, the main focus here is analytical reading because we're going to use our analysis windows approach to help us be prepared to write essays. We're moving into our novel study for the novel Obasan from this week, and in particular, the novel study is linked into essay writing. So these are active reading strategies. Level one, let's begin. So always it's really important for students to keep their purpose at the core of their focus. There's always going to be some sort of an outcome that your instructors want you to produce while you're doing reading. So reading is the passive data accumulation process. So while you're reading, we're expecting you not just to take in what the words on the page say, but we're asking you to look at them through a literary perspective in this level of English class. Therefore, you need to always keep your mind kind of switched on as to what the outcome might be. In particular, what type of assignment might be connected to the reading that you're doing. So we always expect students to track the purpose of their assignment, and I'll just be really clear, we're working on our critical thinking skills in this class, and we're trying to build the ability to develop an analytical view of literature. So you're always going to be asked to make a connection there to some of the literary devices that we've been learning about and working with. So in your purpose, you might write down, in this chapter, I'm supposed to be following the character development, or you might be write down, my purpose for this chapter is to find the major themes that are represented here. Or it might be something more definite and more kind of discrete than that. I might be asking you to track similes or metaphors or personification, some of the literary devices that are really powerful for students to be able to find and then analyze. And in particular, the point of analysis is not just to say, oh, I found a simile, but what is the author trying to do with that simile? So we can use our question words to help us here, like what, how, why. They become very powerful guiding questions. So as I've kind of hinted already, as students, we're always looking for an outcome. We're always looking for the actual assignment that we're going to be asked to perform, and for our purpose, it'll either be analysis paragraphs, triad of support writing, or the biggest type of connection here will be to actual essay writing. So it's not a bad idea for you to remind yourself, I might have to write an essay with this. What components within this chapter would be helpful to me if I'm trying to write a comparison and contrast essay, or if I'm trying to look at how characters develop, or what are the major themes. How does the author use different level 2 devices, those wordplay devices? So these might all be specific things we'd ask you to do in an assignment. And it's a really good idea for us to use our tools that we've already developed up to this point. So you should notice that there's a kind of a strong connection to annotation practices here, and we actually expect you to be taking notes while you're reading. There's two major ways that you can do that. You can either take notes directly in the book itself. I like to take notes within the book itself, but for students, sometimes they want to sell their books back at the end of the semester, and that's totally cool. If that's the category you fall into, then just make sure that you have your notebook beside you while you're reading. And most importantly, if you are taking notes within your notebook, then you'll want to track the page numbers for the exact devices that you're following. So if you're being asked to follow metaphors, make sure you kind of track the pages, the exact page. You could even add paragraph numbers where you found them. The reason this is a good strategy is because then when it comes back to paragraph writing or essay writing, you can refer to your notes, and it makes it a lot easier to find those specific examples again. Okay, so as we've already learned, there are several different windows that we can kind of use to separate the literary devices. So we ask students to be tracking multiple things at the same time. And I find that we can actually make this what we call a split focus or a separated focus. And we do this through our various literary windows. So we've kind of named these things already, and we've used a few different synonym names. Just a reminder, synonym means two different words that have essentially the same meaning. Antonym means two words that have an exactly opposite meaning. So we're going to be looking at the different ways that we can talk about this. So the first window we've identified is the beta window, and these are some of the simpler elements that we might find in stories. So we've also referred to them as core story elements. So these are things like the characters, the setting, the conflicts. We've talked about character foils. We've talked about climax. We've talked about all these different kind of. I like to use the metaphor of story mountain or a story river. So can we track how the story is developing? So you can say on the beta level, I noticed that the main character of this story starts out being having a lack of confidence, but as the story goes on in chapter 3, we notice that the character actually takes some risks, and this can be seen as a good step for the character's development. We noticed in chapter 4, the major conflict is facing our own shortcomings or something like that. So as you're reading, try to keep these core story elements as one of our analytical windows. Next, we look at what we call the alpha window. This is also the wordplay elements, and we've also called these poetic devices. So you can see there's kind of a few different synonyms we can use to talk about these things. These are our things like similes, metaphors, personification. We'd also put alliteration in there, refrain in there, and you can go back and review our unit on poetic devices if you want to touch on those definitions again. But while you're reading our novel, it's really important that you track not only the examples of things like similes and metaphors, but really think about why the author is using them. What do they accomplish? How do they shift the way that we absorb the information from the book? So we can see the what. That's the there's a simile. That's kind of a very basic level of analysis. Okay, yes, we recognized it. And if we were going to connect that back to Bloom's taxonomy, remember we learned the concept of Bloom's taxonomy of intelligence, how there's different levels of thinking. If you're able to identify the simile, that's more on the level of kind of recall and comprehension levels 1 and 2. If you're then able to think about why did the author use that tool there, you're getting up to the analysis level and the evaluation level. So we're up on levels 4 and 5. So obviously we see that's more complex as a level of thinking. So while we're reading, we track our alpha windows, we track our wordplay elements, but we also ask ourselves why. Why is the author using them there? What do they accomplish? So then we go on to what we've kind of termed as our theta window. These are our more advanced story elements, things like carpe diem, in medias res. I would think things like irony could also be seen to live in this area, things like foreshadowing. And so while we're reading, we want to also try to find these more complex and more difficult concepts. Carpe diem, of course, means seize the day. So this is an idea of trying to live in the moment, trying to really squeeze the juice out of life and take advantage of those moments and really live them, right? And then in medias res is this concept that sometimes authors will start a story in the middle of the actual action, and then they go, once they've hooked their reader in, then they go back into the past, so they shift that timeline backwards. So we could say that timeline also lives in this theta window, and then they work the story back forward and move into the climax. So that's in medias res. Finally, the last window is the omega window. Now, under this omega window, we are talking about themes. What are the thematic elements of the story? I would also think that the voice of the author would live here, and also kind of the perspective of the author. So is it, a first person narrative? Is it a third person narrative? We could put these things here under the omega window for our analysis of our novel. Okay, so while you're reading, you should be tracking things, but you can also track them through beta, alpha, theta, omega. So what we do here is we kind of have a system. And now this system is something that I've kind of generated to help my students. You could literally create your own system, and as long as you're able to describe it within the framework of your essay, then you're good to go. This is a good system, but in the future, if you're moving into another class, always try to figure out the framing tools that your instructor wants you to use. That's, again, the idea of systems learning, that whenever we move into a new environment, we need to learn the system of that environment. The more quickly we can learn that system, the better we'll be able to operate within those realities or parameters, however you want to say it.